Hello, good afternoon. Hopefully we won't put you to sleep after lunch. So we are here for a live panel. We're going to talk about AI. In AI, do we trust or not trust? How do we secure agents? The future of AI. So you know what? The most important people in this room are actually you, because we want you all to be very interactive, ask questions. I will introduce myself, then I will pass the mic to the panelists and for them to introduce themselves. So my name is Len Sang. I'm the head of open source at solo.io. I actually wrote a new book, AI Agents in Kubernetes. So for those of you asking questions, I would love to give you a copy of my book. With that, I would like to pass the mic to Ricardo.
Hi, I'm Ricardo Aravena. I've been involved with open source for the last 8 years, specifically with the CNCF. I've actually led the DAG runtime group, and I'm actually in the CNCF TOC now. I've worked in the industry for over 20 years. In the last 15 years, I've worked in infrastructure, in automation, in the cloud. So happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Foxwell. I'm here with a company called Mindgard. We're an offensive security tool which allows you to surface vulnerabilities within your AI applications. Previously, I've been product director for Sneak Container and platform engineering director at VMware.
Hello, my name is Eitan Yarmush. My CV is not nearly as impressive as everyone else here, but I think I'm pretty cool. I'm an architect at Solo.io. I'm a lead maintainer on K-Agent as well as Agent Gateway and some other cool upcoming stuff. But for here, yeah, I've working at Solo.io for 7 years, really in the infrastructure networking space. So.
Hello, I'm Andy Martin, CEO and founder at Control Plane. We are an 8-year-old cloud-native security organization, bootstrapped here in the US and in Europe as well. I used to be one of the co-chairs for Tag Security as well, so super stoked to see security come back. 3 tracks, it's massive. So yeah, schedule looks incredible as well. And Hannah, being very modest, didn't mention that she also runs a conference called AI for the Rest of Us in London, which is making AI accessible. And then between us, we also run the AI Security Collective in London. So we have seen sort of back-to-back AI-enabled security tools for the last 12 months. And it's super interesting to keep a pulse on where the money is being invested, where the next things are coming out. And professionally, we work operationalizing large GPU clusters for regulated organizations. And so very excited to see if someone else can answer some of my questions about how on earth we're supposed to secure all this stuff.
All right, thank you to all the panelists. If you're just coming, basically we're sitting to the order on the screen, so you're recognized if you ask somebody a specific question. I do have a few seating questions. However, I do think it's important to take questions from the audience. So we do have a microphone there. As I'm going to ask my first question to my panelists, if you have specific questions related to secure AI agents, MCP server, do feel free to line up there to ask your questions. All right, let's go. Can we secure AI workloads, agents, and MCP server the same way as we secure traditional microservices? Who wants to take on that first?
Yeah, I can start. So I think traditionally, like a lot of these workloads can use cloud native and cloud native practices or security practices in place. So the basis of all these security practices apply to all of these agentic workloads and AI workloads. But there are a lot of other things in play when you talk about the generative AI, because it's not really predictable. So there's just so many moving pieces. So in reality, I think traditional microservices security needs to be extended. So there's a lot more there. So when you ask a question to an LLM, you can get a different answer every single time, and the same thing happens with agents, so they behave differently. So I'll start with that, but in a sense, I don't think it's the same. The core is the same, but there's just so much more.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the fundamentals still stand. When I'm building agents, I always think about the basics, like the principle of least privilege. Like, okay, so the agent needs to do something useful in my organization. Very, very rarely can an agent do anything useful unless it has access to information, context, data about the work that you do. And so it's about thinking through, okay, what is the minimum amount of data and information that the agent needs access to accomplish its task. I actually quite prefer to decompose agents down to the smallest possible sort of useful amount of responsibility for them, because then you can minimize what they have access to as part of that. But then you think about the humans. So your agent has access to an amount of data and information, and any human that then has access to that data should be they will automatically have access to all that data and information as well. And so it's a sort of inherited sort of privileges there. So it's literally, when you're just designing these systems, it's about thinking about that at the outset. I'm going to give my agent a set of tools. It's going to have access to do certain things, and is that the correct amount of access? Is that the minimal amount of access that it needs to accomplish those tasks?
I completely agree with what's been said so far. And I think, if anything, I view it as kind of a wake-up call, right? Like, in a traditional microservices world, something starts going wrong. There's it might be complex to track down, as the Netflix graph proved. But at the end of the day, there's some attribution, some code owner who knows what the service is doing, who it's calling. But that graph is it's not even deterministic anymore. And so all of the things that we've been talking about for years, tracing, observability, right? Attribution, right? Service accounts, passing identity through the call chain. All of these different things are now they've moved from the realm of nice to have to utterly required in order to fully understand what's happening and lock down the system in case of any kind of breach or issue.
When we design a traditional system, we'd start off with a threat model, and then we look at the data classification. Where is this flowing? Who has access to it? And the promise of LLMs was to have this generalized, artificial, general intelligence, therefore, theoretically, multi-tenanting data classifications in the same endpoint. This is not standard, and certainly for accessibility to the technology, well, it kind of makes some sense. Certainly from what we've seen with a lot of the private organizations who are building out their own security tooling, they're building their own custom models. They're not necessarily even language models. They might be statistical, standards-ish models, if you like. And so, sort of to Hannah's point, that delineation of access to the data, actually what the data is and what the model it's going to should be doing, are pretty closely linked into what the agent itself should be doing. But then there's a high level problem, which is, well, what happens if those agents are then orchestrated by a governor LLM of some description? That is, again, a melting pot of data classifications. These things are not currently solved by the patterns that we're using in general. And then the secondary issue to that is microservices. If you've got a public web-facing socket, you've probably got a WAF or something sat in front of that. For the layer 8, if you like, it's not just the text facing a human at layer 7, it is the context from a human perspective. So that firewalling for prompts then becomes something based on, we've built these things to be like humans, and we're now talking about cognition. Can I trick this LLM with some specious logic? Can I force it to do something that it's not programmed to do? And that prompt guarding probably makes other LLM calls. So you've now got a chain of computational expense for each call that goes in. In a multi-agent system, compound jailbreaks where you've split an attack across multiple agents is not contemplated by current security models. We don't put those firewalls in between each of the agents. So there's quite a lot of work to be done. And if everything starts off with a threat model, that really limits what the systems will do. And then again, just delineates that privilege between the agents. But yes, still work to be done. I agree.
Well, that's very insightful answer. So folks, like I said, this panel is for you. So if you have any questions, please do line up or raise your hand. We will try to get to the questions. So I'm actually going to ask a different question than I had originally prepared. So I hope my panelists are okay with that. While Andy was talking, I started wondering, how many of you are actually adopting zero trust for microservices today? A few of you. So my question to the panelists, though, is: do you agree with all the threats you were talking about, the jailbreak? Do you think zero trust is going to be immensely more critical in the world of AI agents and MCP server? What's your take on that? Maybe we can start with Andy first, so we kind of do it, not always the last person. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, zero trust as a baseline makes a huge amount of sense. We've got workload identity per instance of an agent at that point, and that cryptographic guarantee gives us log signing. We can actually say, this agent did this thing, and we can prove it because we've got a cryptographic chain of trust to our trust root for our domain. What it doesn't do is fix the layer 8 problems. So the threat model is varied depending upon where you're attacking. If we're actually attacking a potentially non-deterministic hostile threat actor behind the firewall, or an LLM, in other words, then zero trust won't actually help unless there's code being generated at runtime that's trying to scan the network or trying to make connections that it shouldn't do. But certainly from cryptographic guarantees in the system, which we can then build further security guarantees on top of, it makes a huge amount of sense. Talking about that sort of distributed tracing and telemetry, it is foundational, because otherwise someone gets into your systems, you get remote code execution into something, and then you've got the identity potentially to push anything to your logging endpoint. And you can start falsifying things internally. Obviously, there's a lot more things that can go wrong at that point. So yes, workload identity, zero trust, table stakes for any sensible system, but further considerations on top.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a Luddite here, but I also come from a networking background. So to me, I think, I'm actually really glad that you asked that question, Lynn, because I think it's exemplary, and I'm guessing that ratio would hold for most of this conference, right? And that might have been 7 hands. So I think that, I totally agree with you that there's very new threat models that we need to be really thinking about and we need to be focusing on. But I think that we also need to be really conscious of meeting people where they're at, and that's something that I feel very I feel very passionate about, and we at Solo feel very passionate about, with our work in Istio and all these other things, and meeting people where they're at and making sure that these systems have a baseline level of security. Because once you have that base in place, right? Once you have the right technologies in place, you can then build up from there. But without that base, you're not going to go anywhere. So as much as I totally agree, we need to be thinking, right? The point of this conference is to think for the future, but also we need to make sure that we have the building blocks in place. And I think that right now, as much as I'm thinking about the future, I'm focused on let's get people in that secure space.
I think security teams are going to have a much bigger problem than we appreciate, because the people building AI agents, the people who are really experimenting with this, they're not developers. They don't know what zero trust is. They're picking up tools like N8N or Langflow or Crew AI, and they're chaining together agents. And I think the only real way to get things like zero trust architectures implemented at scale, when your user base, the people creating agents, are not developers and not security specialists, is if these agentic platforms build it in as default. Luckily they're all open source, so we can contribute to them, and we can be in those communities and have that dialogue. But it doesn't exist in those platforms today. And this is the toolkit that your average person is picking up and getting started with. And so I think for security teams, you might sit around and say, yes, we need zero trust for agents. But basically what you're saying then is we're going to build our own custom agentic platform from scratch, which isn't necessarily a realistic endeavor for most businesses. So I think, we need to be where the communities are, and that is with some of these big open source projects that are building the sort of user, like the low code, no code workflow builders and things like that. That's where we need to focus our efforts as a sort of security community, because that's where the users are.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a different challenge going forward. Zero trust is a great concept, and it should be in everybody's minds. But yeah, like Hannah was saying or just said, that the regular users don't understand that well. You talk about even in the data science world, or people manipulating data, they don't necessarily understand security. So that part is going to be very challenging. In addition, I think because these systems are non-deterministic, it opens up the door to so many different things. Like you have prompt injections, for example, someone can easily trick like one of these LLMs to do something. So one example that I saw recently, I was reading through the Reddit forums, and I saw someone who was able to hack Claude to give it the system prompt by just prompting it. So it through a series of prompts, like maybe 10 of them, and then Claude in the end was able to give it the system prompt. And so initially it says something like, "Oh no, I can't give you that information," right? But then over time, then that person was able to get it. So the same thing will apply to these agents. Like maybe initially, the hackers will not get a response, but they'll keep trying, and then we'll get something. So we'll see what happens. I've seen also organizations and companies working on specialized models that detect patterns in some of these answers, or for example, passwords or malicious attacks, or they look at, for example, on the prompts, if they see some malicious behavior, they can alert that's happening, right? But it's a work in progress. Like everybody says, it's going to be a lot of work going forward.
Well, you just made me think of something. Like one of the things that has surprised me is how many companies are really keen to put these chatbots in front of their customers on the internet as like customer service agents and things like that. And like you just said, like wide open for abuse. Someone who kind of can be like creatively mischievous with one of these tools, can potentially like extract data from your organization or do things that it's not intended to, and like the techniques around that are becoming much more known and mainstream, aren't they? And so it always surprises me how massively keen people are to put this technology like right out there in front of users on the internet. A lot of companies are in fact rushing to do so, which is a security nightmare in my view.
All right, I love the diverse perspective of our panelists, and good job to the audience. We have 2 questions now, so let's give them a round of applause. All right, go ahead.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, panelists, for the time and the valuable information you are providing now. So my question is, instead of trying to provide or give the agent all the permission it needs to access the data sources, isn't there any way just to make the agent assumes the permissions that the person is interacting with just have, instead of having all the access to all the resources that the agent needs to do? And if there is is it actually the responsibility of the agent to check these permissions, or is there any third-party tools that can be set up in front of the agent to do the if we can call it the assuming the rule of the person who asks the agent?
That's a great question. And let me try to just rephrase the question for the recording too, and also make sure we got it. So I think the question is there a simple way to having the agent assuming the roles and the permissions of the user who is executing the agents, and what are we doing to make that process simpler? Is that kind of
Yes.
the gist of the question? Eitan, do you want to take it first?
So first of all, do you want to come work at Solo? No, I'm just kidding. So it's a great lead-in. I think absolutely. And for what it's worth, there's an RFC for exactly that spec. It's called I forget exactly the name, but it's like JOT assumption, JOT delegation. But yes, 100%. I think actually that's exactly how we're thinking about it at Solo. You can easily have a third party, essentially some JOT provider, right, which will sign the JOT on behalf of, and assume the role, right, of the original user. And I think, again, this is why, right, we are, or me, I'll speak for myself personally, are such believers in having something like Istio inside of your cluster between your services, because then you can have those rules, right? You can set up rules on those identities, right? So you can make sure, let's say you have an agent that's assuming the role of a user, trying to call a tool which accesses your data storage, right? You can say only people, right? Only users from the data team, right, are allowed to access this tool. And so the agent acting on behalf of the user, right, from any other team will be rejected. And so that's sort of having that networking and security infrastructure in place, right, already allows you to make decisions and changes for this that work perfectly in this new agentic world. And so that gets back to what I said about sort of just adding on top, right, making sure that you have that infrastructure in place. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so to some extent, for human identity proxied through MCP with OAuth 2 or 2.1 spec, provides some of that if the authentication token is scoped down. But realistically, we've seen MCP implementations. It's the gold rush right now. Everyone wants to be the first. We've got 20 implementations for one given thing. None of them are secure. Many of them, if you go clicking around one of the registries, don't even have a read-only mode. So you can't even enforce that within the MCP itself. The access they request when you actually authenticate is God mode for the individual. And then you have to consider, as a developer, as somebody with access to these systems, do I want to delegate that to a non-deterministic system? So we can do something there, but it doesn't quite work when you're looking at perhaps MCP for agent to agent. That's not really an answered pattern at this point. More widely, JOTs make a lot of sense. They're built to move that delegated authority around the system. But broadly, I mean, it sort of comes back to, well, if we're looking at human versus machine identity, the machine identity, well, it makes sense to have those JOTs going around. For human identity delegated into a distributed system of agents, do we really want to do that? Does the liability for decisions made by that LLM rest with the ultimate owner of that credential? And we're not really going to know the answer to this until we see self-driving cars. It's in the kind of trolley problem space. If a self-driving car kills a load of people, who ultimately is liable? Because that was running with a load of AI systems inside it. I didn't expect to see the robo-taxi Waymo thing roll out so much. They're here in Atlanta as well. Once that hits court, we'll get some interesting answers back. From a capitalist perspective, you can't really hold the corporation liable. So it'll be very interesting to see how that develops. So no solid answer, just lots of Teflon shoulders from me.
Ricardo?
Yeah, I think identity is kind of like an interesting topic because I don't know if there's like you could have an identity in a company, and I guess that can restrict what you can do with like one specific agent. And I guess if the company is set up to do that, like in terms of security, like with all the controls and checks and where that user is coming from, where that data is coming from, what sessions the agent is setting up to other agents, then it can be done, right? I don't think it's done now. So that we'll see more of that in the future. In terms of identity too, like in general identity, if you're interacting with an agent outside of your company, it's kind of like the Wild West now, because, first of all, if you have an identity, I don't think you can actually have a universal identity, because there are regulations and laws around the world around privacy. But if you did, you could interface with so many different tools, and you don't know where they're coming from. So one example is you look at the MCP servers, right? So they're spread all over the internet now. So there's no like central authority on MCP, kind of like the Google App Store or the Apple Store. Like they check and verify that they come from the correct source and the provenance and all that. So hopefully we'll see some of that in the future, like where we have more controls around that, and that will help people, have more of the secure workloads, and also, have that ability to have that, identity and keep track of it. Yeah.
Hannah, you want to take the next question? Because I saw there's a long queue now, which is a great problem.
I don't have too much more to add to that.
Okay.
So I was only going to say, when you're thinking about agent access, you just need to think about blast radius and the impact of something if it goes wrong. And so it may be the right thing to inherit the permissions of the person using it, and it may not be. It'll be very situational.
All right, that's that. Hopefully provide interesting perspective to your question, not necessarily have a solid answer given the state of the industry now. Should I throw the book at you? All right, go ahead to the next person. Go ahead and ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having this panel. My name's Sarah. I spend a lot of time thinking about security, and we have the promise of AI, and AI agents are going to help unlock a lot of that promise. Where, if we want to, obviously we're all like-minded here today, but where are the places where you're seeing maybe over the course of the year where we can participate in communities of which you're aware where these security conversations are happening around agents and securing agents? So, thanks.
Well, good question, Sarah. Do you want to go first, Hannah? I think the question is very well understood, so I'm not going to repeat that. So, Hannah, maybe share your perspective first.
Oh, well, I mean, yes. It may not be relevant to everyone in the room, but Andy and I, we've started a community in London called the AI Security Collective. And that's been really popular because security teams are looking for advice and answers, and building this community has given us and all of us a place to go where we can actually learn from each other, because it is constantly changing. The pace of change is incredibly fast. New risks emerge, and so I think you're absolutely right that we do need community right now. We do need to be sharing best practices, because there is no right answer. No one's going to come and say, well, here's the playbook, this is how you secure it, because it's a moving target all of the time. And so, yeah, I think it would be great to figure out how we can extend these sort of in-person meetup-based communities online, so that more people from all over the world can participate, and we can have a bit more of a global community like that.
Ricardo, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, the CNCF has some initiatives going on. So we have the what we call the TCG, Technical Community Group, and we are actually getting started with that. So we started as a working group, and this is evolving into what we call a technical community group, and we're going to have meetings every other Friday. So look out for CNCF and technical community groups in AI. So the idea there is just, so we have people come in and talk about projects related to AI, and security is a major topic. And we want to also allow people to participate, to bring opinions. And also there's a way for people to engage by creating initiatives. So and we have in the CNCF TOC GitHub repository, and they can open an issue with that initiative. So like say, well, I want to create a standard for agent identity or something like that, right? Or I want to create a white paper so that the community knows about how to create, like how to make agents more secure, right? Or how to make MCP or MCP servers more secure, right? So any idea that you may have can be created, and you can gather the community around it and hopefully rally and make the initiative happen.
Okay, real fast. We still
I'm
more
conscious,
questions.
Yeah, I'm conscious we're almost out of time, but just on that point, there is an MCP Auth X white paper being built by Tag Security and Compliance, who are part of the chairs of this conference, Tag Security. So please do come and join that community. It's one of my favorite places on the internet and in person. And yes, there's a white paper undergoing sort of initial drafting stages there. I also do a lot of work for another Linux Foundation organization called Finos, which is the FinTech open source organization. I was part of a founding team who built out an AI governance framework at the beginning of last year. No MCP, no agent to agent. Instead of building out a reference architecture and getting lost in the movement of the times, we've built what is essentially a regulator and compliance team facing risk management framework, all open source, called the AI governance framework under Finos. And we meet very regularly, as does the white paper for Tag Security. So those are two of my favorite places as well.
Awesome. I would like Eitan take the next question first. All right, go ahead. Do you want the book? Come on, grab yours. Go ahead and the next.
I really want the book.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Hope that provided interest perspective. Good seeing you. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hey, I'm still coming up to speed on a lot of this. When you were discussing some of the problems dealing with, I suppose, identity and authorization in these multi-agent systems, right? A lot of this does resemble headaches that you run into with microservices. But at what point do you introduce, for lack of a better terms, like an attorney sign card who said, "Hey, don't answer that question. Hey, you need to rephrase that before you answer this," right? At what point does judgment come in there as an accomplice in addition to just basic authorization and authentication?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Go ahead.
So wait, I maybe need one clarification from you. When you say attorney, do you mean human or another LLM? Or is that up to my interpretation?
It could be an agent, it could be another process. It's just something to sanity check what's being asked and make sure that it doesn't answer. Don't say things you're not supposed to say.
Yeah, so I don't want to steal the words out of Andy's mouth over here, but I think he definitely mentioned that earlier when he was talking about having prompt guarding from within your service, within your agent to agent chain, right? Because that's sort of that lawyer that you're discussing, right? You have essentially a prompt guarding LLM, right? There are language models and models that have been developed explicitly with the role that these small, quick running models explicitly with the role of detecting jailbreaks, issues with prompts, et cetera. And there are libraries that use this. There's Presidio from Microsoft, which is in Python, and there are others in other languages, as well as external services. Amazon has one, Google has one, et cetera. So that's one. But I think also something that is interesting we haven't talked about yet is human in the loop. And what we have found when working with organizations sensibly is that most people want, at least for now, to sort of, we're in like the crawl, walk, run, right? We're in the crawl stage of this. Most people want pretty much every action to be human accepted, right? Like there's this dream world that we have eventually where the agents just do everything for us, but that's not where we are, right? Where we are right now is human in and on the loop, right? So we want, at every point, whenever the agent is going to take a sort of right action, right, for a human to be able to say, yes, that makes sense, right? I want you to continue with that. And so a very important part of this system not only is having a sort of lawyer in the middle, but actually stopping the agent before it takes the actions and allowing for human accepting, right, of that action. So like, whatever it is, whether it's an email, Slack message, just some mechanism of actually getting in the middle there and making sure that the agent is taking the correct actions before we sort of let it loose.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. Should we take the next question, or anyone wants to weigh in quickly on this?
I'll just add very briefly that fine-tuning of those prompt guards is still an open question, because it's the same as using word block lists. They have to be customized for your organization, for the context, etc. And ultimately, because AIs are trained on the corpus of human information and they're trained as pattern matching machines, there are extremely creative ways to bypass all these prompt guards. So for example, one of my favorites, there are 2 evil eye emoji that have different Unicodes. You can just write binary and it'll be interpreted by most models. So these are still fallible. The human in the loop is very important. There is also a big issue with data operations. As an application developer, do I get to see what my prompt firewall has denied? Or does that go off to the security team because it might have confidential toxicity, PII, whatever? That's not a solved question either, which takes us back to, organizational design as an answer, which is far more expensive and difficult.
All right, go ahead. Sorry for the wait. Go ahead with your question, please.
My question is about authorization policy. So for example, if I want to build a MCP gateway, and for the authorization part, would be what's the difference like when considering like MCP policy engine compared to the traditional policy engine? And for example, like OPA or IAM. So that's like a following question for the first question. So the authorization happens in the gateway, the MCP gateway. And what would be the policy engine? Like, do you have any recommendation or guidelines for the policies?
That's a good thing. Anybody wants to take that?
That's a big one.
Yeah, a big one for sure.
That's a big question because I mean you can have the traditional authentication authorization policies, right? But at the end of the day, so you need to keep track of like maybe what the person has done previously, maybe that person has actually compromised through like some prompts, the system, and then maybe you don't want to provide as much access to that person, right? So it's in progress, and it's hard to determine specifically just because these systems are not deterministic, right? So when we're talking about Gen AI, right? So it's like a convolutional neural network, and then so there are many paths that your answer can take. So, and that's a challenge. So I think a lot of places are trying to introduce the same patterns for security. For example, if somebody wants to access something and they want to prevent it, they create rules, with certain models, and those models maybe can determine like, oh, this person is authorized or not authorized. But I don't see like a very definitive answer, and that's a challenge.
I think part of it is attempting to have as traditionally deterministic a system as possible, which includes API schemas, things that can be statically analyzed between communications, and only call into LLMs when it's absolutely required, when there can be as static a data format returned as possible. And then we start to get into a world where we can actually apply policy based on the content of the response, as well as a more zero trust, beyond core, individual sort of trust score in the user. The DARPA Grand AI challenge that they closed at DEF CON this year was basically, how do you get an autonomous system to patch? And the team that came in third did a great podcast, the Trail of Bits team, and they basically said, as much determinism with as few untrusted agent calls as possible, because if you chain multiple agents together, the first one that goes wrong impacts everything downstream, and it's just exponential from that point. So don't use AI.
Oh my God. Okay. Is that the whole conclusion you want everybody to take with?
Unless you have to.
It's inevitable.
Hannah, do you want to weigh in quickly? I saw you wake up your mic.
Oh, no. I was going to absolutely just agree with that. I've seen people try to use agents for things that you just want to use like a deterministic program for. And so I think we are just in a very unique moment where there's so much enthusiasm and FOMO around LLMs and agentic systems. And I think we need to we just have a word with ourselves sometimes, like, is this actually the right technology to solve this problem? So yeah, what Andy said, as few LLM calls as possible is probably a very wise thing to implement.
All right, I think we're out of time. If the last two panelists, if you want the book, just come by, I will give to you. Thank you all for bearing with us. Hopefully you had fun and learned something new today too. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the KubeCon.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you, great job.